Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Now, we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 11th of May 2019, and the news that will be covered today is given on the screen, and the timestamp for the same is given in the description and the comment section given below. And so, now with this, let us start with the first article. Now, we have taken this lead editorial from the editorial page on page 8. Now this editorial is divided into two parts. The first part highlights on how the Indian banking crisis began or the origin of the Indian banking crisis. The second part which this editorial highlights are the various possible solutions that can be undertaken so as to ensure that another banking crisis does not happen within India. Now this editorial by C. Rangarajan sir should be seen first from the perspective of GS paper 3 within the section Economic Development and within the subsection Indian Economy and issues relating to mobilization of resources, growth and development. Apart from this, it should also be seen from the perspective of GS paper 2 within the section Governance and within the subsection Government Policies and Interventions for Development in various sectors, in particular the banking sectors, and issues arising out of their design and implementation. Now let us first understand as to what C. Rangarajan sir means when he says that India is going through a banking crisis. Now according to the author, there has been a staggering increase in the total number of non-performing assets within India from 2007 and 8. Now according to the author, the total number of non-performing assets in 2007 and 8 was around 500 billion rupees. However, what has happened is that in 2018, this has increased to 10 trillion Indian rupees. Now, apart from this, what the author is also highlighting is that the public sector banks accounted for 86% of these total non-performing assets. Now, this, according to the author, is the Indian banking crisis, whereby the total number of non-performing assets were around 566 billion in 2008, which has increased to 10 trillion Indian rupees in 2018. Now, out of this 10 trillion in non-performing assets, it is the public sector banks which have the 9 trillion in non-performing assets, or 86% of the total non-performing assets. Now, it is within that regard that we're going to understand the first part of the editorial, which is the origin of this Indian banking crisis. Now, the main reason that started the non-performing assets, according to the author, was the credit boom that started in 2004 and ended in 2008. Now, what had happened was that the world economy and the Indian economy were showing tremendous economic growth. Now, because of this tremendous economic growth within India, it led to the doubling of the commercial credit that the banks were providing. Now, what this means is that because of the high economic growth that India was having, the Indian banking system, especially the public sector banks, increased the amount of bank loans that they were giving. Whereby, according to the author, the amount of credit, such as in the form of loans, that the Indian banking system had given out had almost doubled within the period of 2004 till 2008. And this, according to the author, was the credit boom that existed from 2004 till 2008. Now, one of the main problems that led to the Indian banking crisis was that most of the loans that were given out by public sector banks were given to five major sectors. Now, these five major sectors were mining, iron and steel, textiles, infrastructure, and aviation. Now, according to the author, the public sector banks within India accounted for 86% of the loans that were given to these five major sectors. Now, the question arises as to why did the Indian banking system, especially the public sector banks, lend so much money to these five major sectors? Now, as you already understand that the Indian economy was booming and there was huge expectation for tremendous growth within the future. And this became the reason as to why the Indian banking system, especially the public sector banks, lent large amount of money to these five major sectors. However, all of this changed within 2008. Now, what happened in 2008 was that a combination of factors occurred in the world and the Indian economy. Now, the first major global factor that occurred in 2008 was the global financial crisis. Whereby what happened in India was that because of the global financial crisis, the policy rates by the Reserve Bank of India were tightened and the cost of getting commercial credit or bank credit increased tremendously. Now, what this means is that because of the global financial crisis, the Reserve Bank of India increased the policy rates such as the repo rate within India. Now, because of this increase in policy rates by the Reserve Bank of India, the rate at which banks were giving loans to consumers also increased. So for a simple example, let's say in 2004 till 2008, you were able to get a loan at 6%. However, after 2008, this increased to roughly around 8 to 10%. And therefore, the cost of getting credit within India also increased. Apart from this, what also happened is that from 2008 till 2014, the global oil prices used to fluctuate around $100. So as you can see in this graph, the oil prices in 2008 suddenly jumped above $100. And what can be seen is that from 2008 till end of 2014, the oil prices used to hover between $80 to $110. Now, as you already may know, the major import of India is oil. And therefore, India ends up spending a lot of money, especially foreign reserves, to purchase this oil. Now, because the Indian government was spending so much money to purchase oil, it was not able to invest that money within the Indian economy. And therefore, the public expenditure, meaning the amount of money that the government of India spends on, let's say, infrastructure and other development activities, went down after 2008. This decrease in the public expenditure or the government spending in, let's say, infrastructure, this led to a decrease within the economic growth of the Indian economy as compared to the booming period of 2004 till 2008. Now, apart from this, a major impact of the increase in global oil prices was that it led to losses within the aviation companies. So, various aviation companies such as Kingfisher during this period went into major losses. Now, this was because the major operating cost for aviation companies such as Kingfisher was air turbine fuel. And because of the huge increase in global oil prices, there was tremendous increase in the costing of air turbine fuel. And because of this increase in the operating cost, the aviation companies, especially Kingfisher, started to make losses. Apart from this, what also happened was that rupee began to depreciate. Now, if you take a look at this chart, what you see is that in 2008, $1 was equal to around rupees 40. However, what happened was that after the 2008 financial crisis and because of domestic factors, rupee began to depreciate against the US dollars. Now, what you see even today is that this rupee depreciation against the US dollar has still not stopped, whereby it has increased from rupees 40 around 2008 to around rupees 70 in 2018. Now, what happened because of this is that the cost of Indian imports began to increase for both the Indian government and for Indian companies. So let's say in 2008, to import something that costed around $10, Indian companies used to pay around rupees 400. However, what is happening now is that for an Indian company to import something that costs $10, they have to pay 700 rupees. And thereby this has increased the cost of imports for Indian consumers. Apart from this, what also happened in India is that several major projects within the telecom and the mining sector became stalled within India. So for an example, within the telecom sector, after the 2G scam, the Supreme Court cancelled all the allocation of the 2G spectrum. And similarly, because of various scams within the mining sector, such as the Colgate scam, the Supreme Court also cancelled the allocation of mining licenses within India. Therefore, what was seen is that major projects, especially within the mining sector, became stalled within India. Now, this also happened within the real estate sector. So, for an example, major real estate companies had invested money within the Greater Noida region of Uttar Pradesh. But what happened afterwards is that the allocation of land to various companies within the Greater Noida region was cancelled by the Indian judiciary. Now, because of this, what happened was that these companies had borrowed a lot of money from the public sector banks to set up these major projects. But because these major projects were cancelled by the Indian judiciary, they were not able to earn income from these major projects and similarly were not able to either pay the principal amount or the interest back to the public sector banks. Now, what happened because of this is that public sector banks make money by giving out loans. But because these companies within the infrastructure sectors were not able to pay back the principal or the interest amount to the public sector banks, then the profit of the public sector banks decreased. Now, what happened soon afterwards is that these major companies within the infrastructure sectors, whose major projects were stalled, entered into an economic distress, and the loans that they had taken became non-performing assets. Now, these are the four multiple factors which has been highlighted by C. Rangarajan sir as being the cause of the origin of non-performing assets in 2008. Now after this we come to the last aspect of the origin, that is in 2014 and 15. Whereby what happened during these years was that Reserve Bank of India introduced the asset quality review. Now, in simple terms, what was meant by this asset quality review was that the Reserve Bank of India forced the Indian banks to assess the quality of loans that they have given and find out in specific terms whether they are non-performing assets or not. And therefore, this asset quality review forced Indian banks to recognize non-performing assets. Now, common suspicions of the Reserve Bank of India was that Indian banks were not properly classifying bad loans as non-performing assets. And therefore, with regards to this, in 2014-15, it introduced the asset quality review and forced banks, based on certain parameters, to recognize non-performing assets. And what happened soon afterwards is that the non-performing assets that existed with Indian banks almost doubled, whereby the suspicions of the Reserve Bank of India that the Indian banks were not properly classifying bad loans as non-performing assets came to be true. And after the asset quality review system was introduced, the amount of non-performing assets which was recognized by Indian banks almost doubled. However, this doubling of the non-performing assets and the recognition by the Indian banks led to another problem, was that higher NPAs or higher non-performing assets mean higher provisioning requirements. Now, in simple terms, what this meant is that let's say if the State Bank of India had a non-performing assets which was equal to rupees 1000 and the provisioning requirement given by the Reserve Bank of India was let's say at 70%. Therefore, what the State Bank of India had to do was put aside rupees 700 as a provisioning coverage ratio for this non-performing assets. Now, what happened after the asset quality review is that the non-performing assets doubled for the Indian banking system. So now SBI had a non-performing asset of rupees 2000. So let's say the provisioning requirement by the Reserve Bank of India was at 70%. Then for this 2000 non-performing asset, State Bank of India had to set aside rupees 1400. Now State Bank of India cannot use this money as bank credit. And until that time, State Bank of India reduces this rupees 2000 as its non-performing asset, it cannot use this rupees 1400. Now what happened after 2014 is that the non-performing assets continued to grow, and therefore the provisioning requirements for Indian banks also continued to grow. Now because the amount of money that Indian banks had to set aside as provisioning requirement also increased, the amount of money that the banks were able to give out as credit thereby decreased, whereby because of the increased amount of money that they had to put aside as provisioning requirement, the amount of money that they could give out as bank credit decreased. Now because they were able to give less amount of money as bank credit, the amount of profit that the banks were able to make also decreased. And therefore what was seen is that the Indian public sector banks went into losses, whereby State Bank of India for the first time in its history showed a loss within its quarters. Now according to the author, this losses by the Indian banking system, especially the public sector banks, because of the decrease in the bank credit and an increase in the provisioning requirement, led to the origin of the Indian banking crisis. Now we have understood about provisioning in a brief format within this section, and if you need to understand about provisioning in a detailed manner, you can refer to the Daily News Simplified video of 1st of February, in which provisioning has been explained in detail. And apart from this, you also need to understand that provisioning is very important with regards to your upcoming prelims examination of 2019, whereby provisioning has been continuously in the news for the past 1 year and is yet to be asked in your civil services examination. Now, apart from this, what you should also know is that this banking crisis mainly affected the public sector banks because it was the public sector banks that had 86% exposure to these 5 major sectors that ended up having the maximum number of non-performing assets. So now hopefully up till here you've understood the first part of this editorial on how the banking crisis within India originated or how it started. Hopefully you've also understood the 3 time frames which has been given by C. Rangaranjan sir so as to explain the origin of India's banking crisis, whereby it provides the good, bad and the ugly part of India's banking crisis. So now let us understand the various solutions which has been given by the author so that another crisis within India's banking system does not occur. Now you need to understand that most of the possible future solutions which has been highlighted by the author have already been undertaken to some extent by the Indian government. Now the first solution which has been recommended by the author is that banks need to accept losses on loans Now what this means is, let's say some company which has a non-performing asset with the State Bank of India of, let's say, rupees 1000, then what the author is recommending is that the State Bank of India should decrease this loan amount so that the company is able to repay it. Now one of the main reasons as to why public sector banks are not taking haircuts on loans is because then they would be accused of favoring that particular company or that particular individual. And apart from this, it also does not justify for those companies which have been repaying their loans on time, even though they're in economic distress. Now you have to understand that under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the banks have undertaken some haircuts on the loans that they have provided. Now the second solution which has been highlighted by the author is of bank recapitalization by the Government of India. Now again, you need to understand that bank recapitalization has already been undertaken by the Government of India. Now the third solution which has been given by the author is that there should be a limited bank exposure to any form of sector or to any particular business group. Now within that regard, a step has already been taken in April of 2019. Now it has been said that bank can only expose themselves to 25% in any business group. And similarly, banks can only expose themselves to loans to 20% to a single borrower. Now, the fourth and the last reform which has been recommended by the author is of governance reform of banks. Now, within that regard, what the author is saying is that the appointment procedure of individuals to the board of banks should be based on meritocracy. Now, these are the four main solutions which has been highlighted by the author that can be undertaken so as to ensure that there is no future banking crisis within India. However, you have to understand that these solutions have been undertaken by the Government of India in one form or another. And one of the major reform which has been undertaken so as to solve the banking crisis is of the Insolvency and the Bankruptcy Code. However, the author within this editorial does not mention about the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. So now hopefully you've understood both the aspects of this editorial. Now there's a question for practice for your mains examination, whereby the question asks, accelerating economic growth is not possible without finding a solution to the current banking crisis. Highlight causes that led to the current problems confronting the banking system and suggest measures to rectify them. Now you would be able to answer this question with the help of the article and the explanation given in this section. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 80. Now the focus of this article is quite small. Now there's an academic paper which has been published in a journal led by World Health Organization. Now the main argument which has been published within this paper is that India has a low density of health professionals. Apart from this, what the paper has also highlighted is that the state of Bihar, Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh and Rajasthan have the lowest density of health professionals, while states such as Delhi, Kerala, Punjab and Gujarat have higher density of health professionals as compared to the lower states. Now these are the only two main arguments which have been provided within this article and are required to be known for your UPSC examination. Now these generalized facts from this article would be placed in GS paper 2 within the section Social Justice and within the subsection Issues relating to development and management of social sector services relating to health. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 5. Now as you already might be aware of, Cyclone Fani recently hit the Odisha coast. Now because of this Cyclone Fani, it had created 4 new mouths within the Chilika Lake. Now if you take a look at this map of Chilika Lake, a mouth is where this lake meets the Bay of Bengal. Now what had happened is that there were already 2 existing mouths within the Chilika Lake. Now because of Cyclone Fani, 4 new mouths have opened through which the Chilika Lake meets the Bay of Bengal. Now one of the major impact of the opening of these mouths within the Chilika Lake is that salt water from the Bay of Bengal is now entering into the Chilika Lake. Now you need to understand Chilika Lake contains both fresh and brackish water. And what this article is trying to highlight that because of the opening of 4 new mouths within the Chilika Lake, it has led to an increase in salt water within Chilika Lake. And now experts are waiting on how this would impact the ecosystem of Chilika Lake. Now one of the assumptions of the increase in brackish water from the Bay of Bengal to the Chilika Lake is that there might be an increase in bird migration and an increase in the biodiversity in Chilika Lake. However, you have to understand that these impacts are currently assumptions and we'll have to wait and see as to what would be the conclusion of the experts who are studying this recent change within the Chilika Lake ecosystem. So now hopefully up till here you understood as to what this article talks about. Now, apart from this, what you also need to understand are various points about Chilika Lake from the perspective of your prelims examination. Now, we have covered information about the Chilika Lake in a much earlier DNS video, and therefore let us again revise it in today's section. Now, Chilika Lake comprises of three different ecosystems, which are marine, brackish, and freshwater ecosystem. Wherein here the term brackish means slightly salty. Apart from this, Chilika Lake is also a shallow lagoon. Now, a lagoon is a body of water which is separated from a larger body of water such as the sea by a narrow strip. Now, the location of Chilika Lake is that it is located in the state of Odisha, and in particular the district of Puri, Khurda, and Ganjam. Apart from this, Chilika Lake also has islands within it. But one of the main island is Nalaban Island, which is located here in the map. Now, this Nalaban Island is notified as a bird sanctuary under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Now, the in-source rivers of Chilika Lake is made up of roughly 52 rivers and small rivulets such as the Daya River. Now, the Chilika Lake is the largest lagoon in India. Now, as you know, lagoon is a body of water which is separated from a larger body of water such as the sea by a narrow strip. And as you can see here, Chilika Lake is separated from the Bay of Bengal by a narrow strip as shown here in the map. Now, apart from this, Chilika Lake is the largest wintering ground for migratory waterfowl in the Indian subcontinent. Now, these migratory birds are also protected under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Now, Chilika Lake is also a designated Ramsar site, which means Chilika Lake is a wetland of international importance. Now, apart from this, Chilika Lake was also included in the Montreux Record in 1993. Now, the Montreux Record is maintained as part of the Ramsar list, and in general terms, it means those wetlands of international importance which are threatened. Chilika Lake was removed from the Montreux Record in 2002 and became the first site in Asia due to the successful restoration done by the Chilika Development Authority. Now, these are the main facts that you needed to know about Chilika Lake. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now, we have taken this article from page 11. Now, what this article talks about is of a recent controversy with regards to the usage of MCA21 database by the NSSO. Now, what had happened is that the NSSO, or the National Sample Survey Organization, had used the MCA21 database to conduct a survey of the services sector. Now, in simple terms, MCA21 is an e-governance initiative of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Now, this MCA21 database provides a lot of services to companies, whereby companies can register upon it, fill important applications and send data to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, upload information that the Ministry of Corporate Affairs require, and similarly various other services. And NSSO had used this MCA21 database because of its large collection of information to conduct a survey of the services sector. Now, apart from this, you also need to understand that the MCA21 database is also used in the estimation of GDP. Now, what happened recently is that NSSO recently released the survey that it had conducted for the services sector, in which it used the MCA21 database. Now, what was found in this report is that 38% of the companies which had been surveyed by the NSSO were listed as being out of survey units. Now, what happened soon afterwards is that various sections within the media and within the academic field said that these out of survey enterprises which have been given out by NSSO were shell companies, whereby it was said that these companies do not exist within the Indian economy, and therefore it was said that the data which has been provided by these shell companies within the MCA21 database was false or fake data. Now, this false or fake data which had been uploaded on the MCA21 database by the shell companies was then being used to calculate the GDP of India. And therefore, what had been alleged by various sections of the media and academia was that the current estimates of GDP which has been given out based on the MCA21 database was currently wrong. Now, what has happened now is that the Ministry of Finance has given out a clarification. Now, according to the Ministry of Finance, that these 38.7 out of survey enterprises or companies which has been listed by the NSSO, 21% of these companies were out of coverage enterprises which were not required to be included in the NSSO survey. Now, in a simple example, let's say that there were 100 companies which were undertaken by NSSO in its survey. Now what NSSO has said that 38 of these companies were out of survey companies. Now what sections of media and academia has alleged that these 38 companies are shell companies which have provided fake data on the MCA 21 database. And therefore this fake and false data is being used to calculate the estimates of Indian GDP. But what the Ministry of Finance has said that out of these 38 companies which have been labelled as out of survey, 21 companies were out of coverage companies, meaning that these companies had showcased themselves as being in the services sector but were performing economic activities of another sector. Now NSSO was only conducting a survey of the services sector. So when NSSO picked up these 100 companies from the MCA 21 database, 21 of these companies have said that they are service sector companies but perform economic activities within other sectors. And therefore these 21 companies then should not have been used by the NSSO for its services sector survey, and that is why they're called as out of coverage enterprises, which means that NSSO should not have taken these 21 companies as part of its coverage of the services sector. So let's say in an example, there is a company called A. Now this company has said that it is a services sector company, but it manufactures bicycles. Now when NSSO used the MCA 21 database, this company A within the 100 samples that the NSSO had picked up. Now when NSSO released its data, this company A was included in the initial 38 companies which NSSO had labelled as out of survey units, meaning that they should not have been part of the survey of the services sector. Now what the Ministry of Finance is saying is that this company A and roughly 20 other companies, taking the total to 21 companies, were basically companies that had listed themselves as service sector companies but were either in the manufacturing or the agriculture sector. And therefore they should not have been part of the coverage by NSSO in its survey of the services sector. Now apart from this, what the Ministry of Finance has said is that rest of the 17% that make up the 38% of out of survey companies, these 17% might be shell companies. Now, as we have already understood, that 21% were out of coverage companies, meaning that they were not engaged within the services sector, but may have been engaged within the manufacturing or the agriculture sector. Now, since they were not engaged within the services sector, they should not have been included within the NSSO services sector survey. But according to the Ministry of Finance, these 21% companies are engaged in some form of economic activities, either in the manufacturing or the agriculture sector, and therefore they can be included within the estimations of GDP. Now again, let us take the example of the company A. Now this company had mislabeled itself as working within the services sector, but was working within the manufacturing sector by producing bicycles. Now according to the Ministry of Finance, this company A should not be included within the services sector survey of NSSO, and it's therefore an out of coverage company, meaning that it should not be covered within the services sector survey of NSSO. Now, according to the Ministry of Finance, that even though this company might not be within the services sector, it is still producing some economic activity within the manufacturing sector. And therefore, any data which this company A has uploaded on the MCA 21 database can be used as authentic economic data to calculate the GDP estimates. Now the only problem with this company A is that it has mislabeled itself as a services sector company, and according to the Ministry of Finance, that does not mean that it is a shell company. Now according to the Ministry of Finance, these 21% companies should not be mislabeled as shell companies, since they might be producing economic activity in another sector such as manufacturing or agriculture, and therefore any data which they upload on the MCA 21 database can be used to calculate the GDP estimates. So now hopefully you've understood the recent controversy with regards to this NSSO survey. Now you need to understand that this news is currently in transition. Now let us wait and see as to what would be the reaction of the sections of Indian media and of Indian academia with regards to this clarification which has been given out by the Ministry of Finance. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now this article has appeared on page 1 and has also continued on page 8. Now what this article is talking about is a recent law of Karnataka which was passed in 2018. Now in this law, Karnataka had allowed reservation in promotion for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Now what has happened recently is that the Supreme Court has said that this Karnataka law is valid. Now what had happened was that the Supreme Court in the Indaswani case of 1992 had held that reservations which had been made under Article 16, Clause 4 of the Constitution of India can only be provided at the time of entry and cannot be provided in matters of promotion. Now, after the verdict in the Indraswamy case, the Indian Parliament in 1995 adopted the 77th Amendment to the Constitution of India, whereby they added Clause 4A to Article 16. Now, this Clause 4A of Article 16 enabled reservation to be made in the promotion for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Now, the next major milestone with regards to reservation in promotion for scheduled caste and scheduled tribe happened in the Nagaraj case in 2006, whereby the Supreme Court upheld the validity of Article 16 Clause 4A, whereby the Supreme Court said that Clause 4A of Article 16 is an enabling provision whereby it helps in the social development of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, and also enables the Government of India to fulfill its obligations under the Directive Principles of State Policy or DPSP. However, the Supreme Court added various conditions with regards to reservation in promotion for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Now, the Supreme Court said that the central government or the state government which wants to provide reservation in promotion for scheduled caste and scheduled tribe must collect data on three parameters. The first parameter is with regards to the backwardness of the particular class for whom reservation in promotion is being provided, whether that particular class is inadequately represented in public employment, and lastly, that the general efficiency of services should not be affected that has been mandated under Article 335 of the Constitution of India. Now, what happened afterwards is that in 2012, the Karnataka government passed a law which provided reservation in promotion for scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. However, what happened in 2017 in BK Pavitra case, the Supreme Court said that Karnataka has not fulfilled its obligation that had been provided under the Nagaraj case, whereby the Karnataka government did not provide any quantifiable data to pass a law for reservation in promotion for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Now, because the Supreme Court in 2017 in BK Pavitra case said that the 2012 law of Karnataka was not valid with regards to providing reservation in promotion, the Karnataka government constituted the Ratna Prabha Committee in 2017. And what happened afterwards is that the Karnataka government enacted the Promotion on Basis of Reservation Act of 2018 based on this Ratna Prabha Committee report, whereby this Ratna Prabha Committee report provided the quantifiable data which had been mandated in the Nagaraj case. Now, because this Karnataka Promotion on Basis of Reservation Act of 2018 was based on quantifiable data that was provided by the Ratna Prabha Committee of 2017, the Supreme Court upheld the act and said that it fulfilled all the obligations that was made under the Nagaraj case. Now, these are the main points that you needed to understand with regards to this article, and hopefully you've gotten a brief background with regards to reservation in promotion for scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. Now, let us understand the various observations which has been made by the Supreme Court while upholding the law of Karnataka with regards to promotion on basis of reservation. Now, the Supreme Court has said that a meritorious candidate is not merely one who is talented or successful. Now, according to the Supreme Court, a meritorious appointment is one that also fulfills the constitutional goals, whereby an appointment which uplifts members of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes and therefore ensures a diverse and representative administration fulfills the constitutional goals of the central and the state governments. Therefore, according to the Supreme Court, a meritorious candidate is not only one which receives the highest marks, but can be someone from a scheduled caste or scheduled tribe who ensures that a diverse and representative administration is formed by their appointment. Now, the Supreme Court in the R.K. Sabharwal case of 1995 said that it is open to state to make reservation in promotion for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes in proportionate to their representation in the general population. Now, the Supreme Court in the Karnataka case of 2019 had upheld the view which was given in the R.K. Sabharwal case that states can make reservation in promotion for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes proportionate to their representation in the general population. Now, the Supreme Court has also said that Article 335 of the Constitution of India recognizes that special measures need to be adopted so as to ensure access of opportunity for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Therefore, according to the Supreme Court, it is within the authority of the union government and the state government to adopt special measures so as to ensure appointment in public services and public posts for scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. And this access to opportunity also includes reservation in promotion. The fourth main observation given by the Supreme Court is that the efficiency of administration must be defined in an inclusive sense, whereby, according to the Supreme Court, diverse segments of Indian society should find representation within the Indian administration. And therefore, providing reservation in promotion ensures that diverse segments of society find representation within administration. And thereby, it makes the Indian public administration more inclusive. Now, the Supreme Court has also said that it is within the authority and the power of the state legislature to form reservation in promotion based on the powers that it has under Article 16, Clause 4A. Now, Article 16 of the Constitution of India provides equality of opportunity in matters of public employment, whereby Article 16 says that there shall be equality of opportunity for all citizens in matters relating to employment or appointment to any office under the state. Now, Clause 4A of Article 16 says that the government can make any provision for reservation in matters of promotion, and this can be made in favor of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes who are not adequately represented in the services of the state. Now, the Supreme Court has said that it is the power of the central and the state government under Article 16 Clause 4A to provide reservation in promotion. However, again you have to understand that it is based on conditions which has been put up in the Nagaraj case. Now, the last main observation which has been given by the Supreme Court is that administrative efficiency can only be decided after an official has been appointed, whereby administrative efficiency cannot be decided within the selection method itself. Now, one of the arguments that has been made against the Karnataka law is that it would decrease administrative efficiency. However, the Supreme Court has said that you can only measure administrative efficiency after a person has been appointed. And according to the Supreme Court, state services examination or any other selection method does not measure administrative efficiency. And therefore, according to the Supreme Court, administrative efficiency is not tied to the selection method itself. Now, these are the main observations of the Supreme Court while hearing the recent Karnataka law on providing promotion on basis of reservation. Now, this article should be seen from the perspective of GS Paper 2 within the section Social Justice and within the subsection Laws Constituted for the Protection and Betterment of Vulnerable Sections. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now, there are two questions for practice, and what you need to do is pause this video, solve both of these questions, and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now, the correct answer to question number 1 is D, 1, 2 and 3. Now, with regards to statement number 1, Reserve Bank of India has set the limit of 1st of April 2019, under which banks had to limit their exposure to a group of connected companies at 25% and to an individual company at 15%. While with regards to statement number 2, it is true that public sector banks account for majority of the exposure to non-performing assets, whereby according to C. Rangarajan sir, this exposure is around 86%. Now, statement number 3 is also correct. Now, with regards to statement number 3, it has been seen that private sector banks do have a higher gross NPA to gross advance ratio, whereby for the Standard Chartered Bank, the gross NPA to gross advance ratio is around 11%, while for the State Bank of India, it is at 10%. However, you need to understand that the gross NPA to gross advance ratio for private sector banks and public sector banks is quite close. However, just because public sector banks account for majority of the exposure to non-performing assets, it does not mean that they have a higher gross NPA to gross advance ratio. Now, with regards to question number 2, MCA 21 is associated with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and therefore the correct answer to question number 2 is A. Now, there are 2 more questions for practice, and as you already understand, pause this video, solve both of these questions, and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now, with regards to question number 3, the correct answer is D, neither 1 nor 2. Now, Chilika Lake is a natural lagoon which has been formed on the coast of Bay of Bengal. And apart from this, Chilika Lake contains both fresh water and brackish water, and therefore it hosts both freshwater species and seawater species. Now, with regards to question number 4, the correct answer is A, 1 only. Now, this question asks which of the statements given above is incorrect. Now, with regards to statement number 2, Article 16 does provide equality of opportunity for all citizens to employment to any office under the state, While with regards to statement number 1, reservation of appointments can be made in favor of any backward class of citizens, whereby this has been provided under Article 16 Clause 4. And therefore the incorrect statement is statement number 1. And now with this we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.